This is Discourse Lab. I'm Anthony Rispo.
And I am Clayton Smith.
On this podcast, you'll hear a wide range of perspectives from an ideologically diverse suite of guests.
Our goal? To use conversation to analyze ideas, test arguments, and question dogmas. Now, let's head into the lab.
Welcome back to the Discourse Lab, everyone. Today, we are joined by Dr. Joe Duarte, a social psychologist whose work centers on political diversity, open inquiry, and methodological rigor in the behavioral sciences. He's best known as a lead author of the landmark 2015 paper, Political Diversity Will Improve Social Psychological Science, which challenged the field to confront its overwhelming ideological homogeneity. Joe's work spans data analysis, statistical critique, and the philosophy of science, all things I'm really obsessed with, actually. And he's been a prominent voice on how both political and methodological bias can shape research outcomes and erode public trust in science. So we can unpack all of that. I mean, if it were up to me, we'd go for hours, but why don't we start somewhere? Did I leave anything out, or is there anything you'd like to start with, Joe? Leave it up to you.
No, that's a pretty good summary. We can just talk about whatever you want to.
Great. Well, Joe, we were talking just before we started recording, and I just thought this would be a fun tidbit to throw at the beginning, is that a paper that we're going to talk about that you were quite famous for was one of the inspirations for the organization that Anthony and I are formerly affiliated with, which is Heterodox Academy. So, and you had a funny story about that. So I was just wondering if you could tell the audience what you just told us before we hit record while we were chit-chatting.
Yeah, so I voted against the name, right? So it was the authors of that 2015 BBS paper, Behavioral and Brain Sciences, who launched Heterodox Academy, right? And so I was in this group, and I think I published one or two articles or blog posts on the website initially too. But I didn't like the name Heterodox. At the time, I thought it was too stuffy and like old men smoking cigars in some kind of exclusive club type of thing. We're the Heterodox Academy, bow tie types. But now I think it's mostly an issue of social proof, and the name marginalizes you because it casts you as a heterodox, minority, non-mainstream view, and that kind of signals that it's not necessarily the correct view naturally to people. So I've never really liked the name. That's all.
That's really funny because the first time I came across your paper, this 2015 paper, was in a political psychology seminar at Columbia. There are about, 10 to 12, students. A person, when I mentioned Heterodox Academy, that I founded the group on campus, it was just new at that point. I was excited to get the word out, especially in a political psychology seminar. This is going to be great. People are going to likely enjoy this, you would imagine. And the first thing that came out of one of the students' mouth was, "Oh, that's Jonathan Haidt. He's super far right, isn't he?" I'm like, I don't know what to do with that information at this point. So just a flat tire straight out the gate. But this is where we nonetheless, this is actually that class was where that seminar is where we spend time on your paper, and I found it to be fascinating. I think one of the most interesting. It's quite a dense paper, actually. It's a great read. I recommend everyone to look at it because it's relevant to this day. But I would love for you to give us a little tour of the paper, if you wouldn't mind. There's especially the kind of the most pressing part to me, or problem. I hate the word problematic, but I'll say it. Problematic part is the asymmetry in terms of representation for liberal and conservative psychologists in the field. So, but generally speaking, if you give us a little bit of a tour of the paper, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm going to bring it up just so I can refer to it. But essentially, we covered a few big issues, one of which was the representation that you talked about, that leftists, nay, liberals, vastly outnumber conservatives, and in not just social psychology, but also, all the other domains of psychology, right? Like clinical, developmental, neuro, everything. So, and it's worse in psychology than it is in real sciences. It might be no worse than it is in the so-called humanities. And that's a big issue. And we talked about, possible reasons and hypotheses people had. And touching on that point, I'll tell you about like how this paper came to be.
Mm-hmm.
This paper got rejected, right? We were like a sure thing to be in Perspectives, right? That's an APS journal, Perspectives in Psychological Science, right? And that was where the paper was originally, destined. And John had talked to the editor, Bobby Spellman, in advance. I think they had dinner or something. And so that's where we submitted the paper. And we were all shocked when we got rejected. And it wasn't a revise and resubmit situation. It was just a rejection. And it was very confusing. It was very confusing to John. He thought something must have happened, and, personally. I think the senior authors, my colleagues, I think were in a bit of denial about the merits of some of the criticisms. But one of the things that one of the negative reviewers said was to assert that the reason there are hardly any conservatives in psychology, in academia, is because they're joining the military for the money. They're joining the military and for the money. So that tells you how incredibly out of touch and to the point of being delusional that some of these academics are. They thought that the military is really remunerative, and it's not, right? I mean, Clay's been was in the Air Force and everything. So, you don't really make money in the military until you're like an 06 or something. You really need to put in a lot of time, and then you'd be like an affluent 6-figure salary kind of person. But that takes forever, right? So no, the military is not lucrative. And, I would have expected to hear something about Wall Street, but not the military. So that was the perspective of one of the reviewers. And that kind of tells you how steep a hill or whatever we had to climb. So that's one aspect of the paper. The aspect that I'm most focused on, that I was most focused on in the writing, was the issue of validity, the issue of how ideological bias undermines the validity of a lot of research. And what that means is that either the research is false or it's not even false because it has no meaning. So an example that we talked about in the paper is something by out of John Jost's lab at NYU, right? You can get lots of examples from NYU, which probably pleases Columbia people. But
I'm wearing the sweater right now.
Yeah. Looks just like my Tar Heel gear. Same color, huh?
Yeah.
So the paper was about denial of environmental realities, which already you're kind of wondering what's up with that. But the scale has items like the Earth is like a spaceship with limited room and resources, right? That's an analogy, right? That's neither true nor false. That can't be evaluated as true or false. It's an opinion, and it's an analogy. But if you disagreed with it, if you disagreed with this analogy of the Earth is like a spaceship with limited room and resources, you were scored high on denial of environmental realities, right? Realities. And other items would be things like they're basically prophecies, like, some doom is coming if we don't do something. It wasn't even specific about, say, climate change or CO2 or warming. It was just very broad and vague. So that kind of research is invalid because you can't call agreement with an analogy or disagreement with an analogy denial of any kind of reality, right? It's a complete matter of opinion, And prophecies are not facts because, they're about the future. You can't call someone denying reality because they disagree with a vague prophecy about the
Right.
environment or nature. So that's just invalid. It doesn't even matter what the data shows. It doesn't matter what the scores are. It doesn't
Right.
matter what your p-values are. None of that matters. It's vacated. Epistemically, it has no standing. So that's what I meant by ideological bias that undermines the validity of research. That kind of stuff is just epistemic pollution. We just need to get it out of the literature, get it out of our heads, because that's not anything. So that was my main focus for the paper.
And the paper I think that you're pulling that example from is this. It's titled "NASA Faked the Moon Landing. Therefore, Climate Science is a Hoax: An Anatomy of the Motivated Rejection of Science," which is something that you've pointed out the many flaws of, and we'll get to that in a second. I want to.
Right, different paper though.
Oh, is that a different paper? Am I misremembering that?
Yeah, that one's not from Jost. The one I'm talking about is Fagina and Jost. It's in our paper, the 2015 that we're talking about, right? So you can find it there. Yeah, no, there's so many examples. It's going to be hard to keep track.
It sounded so similar to the kind of thing you talk about in the other paper. So that goes to show, that kind of proof of concept right there.
It's amazing.
But before we get into all of that, really quickly, one of the things that you talk about in your 2015-2014 paper, let me pull it up here and make sure I get this right. The political diversity will improve social psychological science. The one you were talking about. One of the things you talk about in this paper is how psychology used to not be this politically one-sided. And you kind of made reference to that earlier, where one of the reviewers says like, oh, well, one of the reasons for that is because someone's joining the military to make money, which, yes, you and I were both in the military at one point, Joe. That is a preposterous assertion. I mean, you're not like poor in the military. It's not, you're comfortable, but it's a little bit, but it's not luxurious. But so I'm curious what, and I think you do go into this in the paper, but just explain to us, like, what is, in your estimation, what are the reasons for this sort of transition from a more evenly distributed political or evenly distributed array of political viewpoints in the field to something being much more lopsided towards the left or the liberals, or however you want to put it?
Right, yeah. I think you're right to use the plural reasons. I think there are several. One is discrimination. I experienced that myself. I was kind of lucky to be able to sort of walk around it. So the University of Arizona Social Psychology PhD program. So this is not ASU. This is the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson, which is really where my home base was. They denied me admission because I criticized Jimmy Carter in a blog post. They actually brought it up on the phone interview. And they asked me, Stephanie Freiberg asked me, do you really feel that way about Carter? Right? That's a quote. And so, and they denied me admission. And I say I was lucky. Well, I mean, lucky in that I was a really good candidate. So Arizona wasn't one of the best programs. I got into better programs. You have to apply to lots of programs when you want to pursue this, right? So I got into Berkeley, UNC, and ASU. Then that discrimination happened at Arizona, and it didn't really matter. But, in other cases, you model this out, scale it out, it matters. That could even happen is outrageous, right? It's crazy. And this was about this was 2007, so it was about Carter's then recent book, which, in my and other people's opinions, it rationalized Palestinian terrorism, and it caused all the Jewish members of his Carter Center board to resign, right? So this wasn't some kind of crackpot view or anything. He lost all his Jewish board members. This just probably something people don't even remember anymore. But that happened, and then, I chose UNC, right? So I finished at ASU, but I chose UNC. Well, why did I finish at ASU? So I chose to work with Barbara Fredrickson, who's a famous positive psychologist, positive emotions researcher at UNC in Chapel Hill. And Also, they have fMRI there, so that was a big factor, and ASU didn't. Um, but, I started grad school in '07, so then '08, going into '08. Uh, Lab meetings became sometimes like Obama campaign
Mm-hmm.
rah-rah, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this was, you probably remember maybe dimly the Obama campaign and victory. It was a lot of very emotional for a lot of people, and I was I always tried to keep politics out of work, and grad school to me was work. It's more of a job than being a student. So I wasn't bringing my own political views. I didn't support either of the candidates, but my silence was violence. My silence was
Mm.
used to infer. This actually saved me a bit, but they assumed that I supported McCain because I was from Arizona. So they wrote it off to
Right, of course.
geography, home state kind of thing, which would be better than me being, oh my God, an actual Republican. All right. So they kind of rationalized, oh, he's just supporting McCain then because he's from Arizona. Maybe he knows him or something. I don't know. But
Interesting distinction.
it was just very uncomfortable, but it became apparent from my silence and my non-participation in all this stuff that I didn't support Obama. And various other things like that happened. And I found an error in one of Barb's journal articles. And she told me one of the most incredible things anyone has ever told me, especially now looking back, given what I've done since, right? She said, when you think you found an error in a peer-reviewed journal article, assume that the error is your own.
Mm.
Now, that's a hell of a thing to tell a grad student. It's a hell of a thing to tell a budding scientist, right? A scientist in training. Your mentee, someone you're supposed to develop.
Well,
It's
that's
also
so
crazy false. Like, it's a terrible idea.
Well, I was just going to
What
say,
was that,
it seems like it's so close to something that's good advice, which is if you see an error in a peer-reviewed article, be extra sure, double check yourself, do your homework. That's good advice. But to just assume that you must be wrong, it's like a small difference that makes a huge difference, right? A small change that makes a huge difference.
It's a great way of putting it.
Bizarre.
Yeah, and that, the heuristic, this is really a heuristic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this authoritarian epistemology is a heuristic, but heuristics are really only needed in emergencies, right? So when you're pressed for time, this was pretty clear cut because what the issue was the text, the body text of the article described the graph as the opposite of what the graph actually showed, right? So it was like if it was saying, something increased, the graph actually showed it decreased. It was that kind of thing. And so it only would take a minute to really engage with it and to understand, okay, the text is saying this, okay, confirmed. The graph is showing this, okay, right? So it's a pretty easy to sort out. So then I contacted one of the co-authors, one of her former grad students, Christian Waugh, who was at Wake Forest at the time, I think.
Mm.
And he confirmed the error. He was like, "Oh my God, you're right. This is an error or something." And Barb kicked me out of her lab, I think, within a month of that point. So in the spring of '09, she kicked me out of her lab, I think, by March. So that was my second year. So I was there almost 2 years at that point. And I was an NSF fellow too. I just won. So I was in the first year of my NSF fellowship, which made me a free and, prestigious student. So then I had to leave because, if your advisor kicks you out of their lab and it's like a small program, only a few other people, the program chair was Lawrence Santa, who turned out to be a fraud. Like this was actually reported and exposed. He was busted by Yuri Simonson. There was just a handful of people. There was nowhere else to go, right? So if you go there to work with someone and you want to do positive emotions research, or whatever it is you want to do, and they're the only person who does that, you can't just bounce to another lab and study, whether cops are prejudiced against black people or something, right? That's totally different area.
Yeah. Different
So
domain, yeah.
I had to scramble and try to see if I could transfer, somewhere else. Like, so I contacted the places that accepted me, Berkeley, ASU, and Florida State with Roy Baumeister, because he was a late admit or something. They accepted me after I already decided on UNC, and Roy and I had a good relationship. So I contacted everyone, and ASU made it easier to do an actual transfer, which is really rare. And grad school is going to be a totally bespoke situation, and they made it so I didn't have to take like first year stats courses all over again and all that. And I was a free student, which helped because I had the NSF, and the NSF was transferable. It went with me. So I transferred to ASU in 09.
Okay, so what it sounds like is it's not just that there is discrimination, but also like in the outright sense where you have that person at Arizona basically telling you, oh, you disagree with Jimmy Carter, we don't want you. But it's also a sort of culture or an atmosphere of unacceptance that probably, would certainly keep a young researcher kind of on their toes and make them a little nervous to speak their mind. And so that, I imagine, keeps people silent. I mean, this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, this atmosphere of censoriousness, of unacceptance, silences people. It dampens discussion.
Right. And it's a very hierarchical environment. It was very difficult for me coming from like having a job in the private sector, working in the software industry, software QA and stuff. Some advisors, a lot of academics need a lot of deference, right? And I wasn't used to that. Like there's a lot more deferential than just having a boss in a normal workplace, right? So that kind of dynamic was tough.
Yeah. Just to jump back into the asymmetry and to kind of give a little more of a foundation for listeners, because as listeners know at this point, I studied psychology at Columbia, and I think my experience was, I would say, overall pretty all right. I was in a lab and that focused on narrative and perspective taking, and it was a lot of social cognition, social neuroscience, and generally speaking, like I said, it was a good experience, but the milieu, the culture was definitely gripped by the political season. And it was clear that there was one point of view in the building, especially in the psych department. And it was implied, it was known. But I remember I was at a colloquium at an event where we had a guest. He was a climate scientist. He was not a climate scientist. He was a psychologist who studied perception of climate. Why people reject climate science, etc. And his claim is sort of similar to what you mentioned in the paper. It's already stated that this thing is happening. End of story. And so why is it that these people don't accept it? Why is it that conservatives can't accept this? And so I won't go through the whole thing, but the real part that's interesting is after the talk, I asked one of the professors there at Columbia, I said, it would be so much better to have a variety of people come here with different perspectives, because with this guest, I can't remember his name, what this guest is getting at is that he wants to change people's minds, but wouldn't it be better to have scientists who have different perspectives working together to come to some kind of understanding of each other? It was a very basic thing to ask after an event like that, because I didn't want to go deep into it too much. I just wanted to hear her response, and she knew exactly what I was getting at. This whole viewpoint diversity thing was a cue for her, and what her response was well, it's self-selection. Liberal scientists, they come to university because it's self-selection. And in my mind, I was just like, my mind started racing. I was like, what? When you look at your paper, and I looked this up before we came on, it's something like 10.5 to 1 liberal to conservative in terms of like in psychology. For every 11 psychologists, the odds of finding a conservative is like 1.
Right.
So just to give listeners, this paper was from 2015, but this is still a pervasive thing, right? Would you say that with your colleagues or friends, that has there been any shift whatsoever in the field? I mean, there's your voice, there's Jonathan Haidt, there's Lee Jussum, who's very vocal, but is this just still an underground, or do you sense a shift at all?
Oh, what do you mean by an underground?
An underground research program of dissenters, of social psychologists who are actually pushing against the narrative by bringing about good science, like not just the other side of things and, take it and eat it, but like actually testing the claims of testing existing claims. Do you sense that there's more dissenting voices, maybe as a result of heterodox, or since 2015, any of that? No.
No, I think it's the situation in terms of intellectual, political diversity and like tolerance for non-leftist views has gotten somewhat worse than it was in 2015.
Somewhat worse, yeah.
And I think the numbers that you mentioned, like the ratios, are understating the problem, because I mean, I don't know if that was supposed to be a ratio. Well, first of all, there's a problem with the measure, right? Which is, if it's I've talked to David, what's his name, about it. If it's like ratio of Democrats to Republicans, right? That's only a subset of the faculty. It might not even be half, because a lot of people won't be registered with any party. For a lot of, I mean, academia is the kind of place that the reason someone wouldn't be a Democrat is because they're a freaking communist, and they think Democrats are neoliberal,
too far right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
they're more likely to be like just too far left to be comfortable with the Democratic Party, right? And I don't know a single conservative social psychologist in America, right? So I don't like this 10 to 1 stuff. I think that was pretty far back. If we're talking about an actual conservative,
I'm sorry, you don't know a single one?
A single one, no. The only one I know is in New Zealand.
That's
Right.
shocking.
Yeah.
That's literally the exact opposite part of the world. You can't even, you have to go the exact opposite quadrant of the globe to find one social psychologist who's
they're like
conservative.
18 hours ahead of me right now.
Yeah.
You have to like.
They're in Middle Earth, Joe.
Yeah. They're in.
A social psychologist just generally, or that has a view that's different from, that's not like far on the left. What was that again?
I don't know a single conservative social psychologist.
Okay.
So I don't know of anyone in America who is a conservative and a social psychologist. Like,
yeah, they're kind of like by proxy. Like, I mean, I guess if you consider, I mean, Jordan Peterson's not a social psychologist, but he's a personality psychologist. But you're not in the actual academy. That's interesting.
Yeah, and with him,
yeah,
there's always a catch. Like, I mean, just to keep it simple, just a clean conservative, and Jordan Peterson is not, and Lee is not, right? And I like to say lately, I mean, at the time I just called myself a libertarian. Lately, I'm like a libertarian who doesn't do drugs. I feel like I need to qualify it, and who caucuses with conservatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes sense. Luke Conway, he's a conservative social psychologist. He's the one who hopped on board the left-wing authoritarianism research after Costello. I think after or before, maybe before, but Luke Conway at Garden Grove College in Pennsylvania. Yep.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Yep. Luke Conway. I think you two getting to chatting would be pretty incredible, actually.
I know of Luke a little bit, but I didn't know about Garden Grove.
Yeah. I would love to see what you think about jumping into, for listeners especially, this amorphous thing that is psychology and the constructs and things like microaggressions and racism and things like that, how these things are measured. And maybe this would be a good thing to talk about and then segue into this other paper you sent me. But first, if we can give listeners an idea of, let's take the microaggressions, if we can start there as an idea. How does a psychologist, a researcher, even think, this is a thing, and then, I'm gonna research this, and then if you wouldn't mind helping us understand that, and then from your perspective, why, I'm gonna kind of give it away, why it's a pretty fraudulent enterprise, that would be great.
There's going to be a lot of fraud talk in this podcast.
Yeah.
It's a common theme.
Yeah. So microaggressions, like a lot of these constructs, it comes from outside the field, right? It was not invented by social psychologists or any kind of empirical researcher. This is just leftist ideology, typically coming out of humanities departments. I don't know the origin story for microaggression. I just know it didn't come from social psychology. Social psychologists will just seamlessly import leftist ideology. And I argue that what makes the left a cult is that a few things. They don't distinguish their ideological tenets and value judgments from descriptive, objective reality, right? So, and they have a lot of Orwellian constructs like microaggressions, right? And it's supposed to, normally it's just defined by examples. I don't know a good capsule definition, but you can search on, like, say, the School of Public Health at Minnesota had a document that lists a bunch of microaggressions. And it's things like a white person denying that they're racist. That's a microaggression. Asking someone where they're from, typically if they're a minority. Praising a precocious minority child by telling them that they're smart, right? Because, so you get the pattern here is they're assuming a sinister motive that's baked into this whole construct. They're assuming that the reason you're telling this, this precocious black 9-year-old that he's smart is because he's black and you're a racist and you think black kids can't be smart. When right. You're just noticing, wow, you're really smart. Akila and the bee, she won the spelling bee. Like, wow, that's great, right? So they just assert a motive that they have not discovered. They've not empirically sussed this out. And that's key. This isn't evidence-based. This isn't empirical. They just assert the motive. And so, and then, saying that it's a microaggression for a white person to deny that they're racist, that's sitting on top of a whole package of assumptions. That's sitting on top of the new leftist race ideology, CRT, the new definition of racism, and uses like a leftist account of power, and that stipulates that only white people can be racist. And they all are because of structural, systemic reasons, just like it was someone dug out of the NEA, the National Education Association's website the other day, that that white privilege exists even for poor white people.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
Even if you don't have economic privilege, you still have racial white privilege, right? So this is all dogma. This is ideology. This is a very different way of talking. That most humans don't talk like this. We don't have constructs and abstractions like this, and we don't preemptively psychologize infinite strangers using these injunction type abstractions, right? So microaggressions, if that's what it is, there's no way to move forward with it as a scientist, if you're a clean social psychologist, you can't operate on the assumption that it's any kind of aggression for a white person or a yellow or purple person to deny that they're racist, right? That's just not an assumption you can make. That's an ideological assumption.
Right.
Non-falsifiable too.
It strikes
Right.
me as I'm my kind of area of interest is, unlike Anthony's, more in the realm of like international relations, but there's this sort of similarity, this funny similarity that I'm thinking of right now, which is you have this preconceived notion like microaggressions, they're real and they have impact, and so because you believe that from the get-go, A, it causes all kinds of problems with your research methodology, but B, it's really like the methodology, I mean, obviously, isn't meant to really prove it. It's meant to support it. It's meant to be this sort of facade that just allows you to continue to make this claim, and adds a sort of fake legit. It's meant to present the illusion of legitimacy, is what I'm trying to say. It strikes me as that's the only purpose it can serve when you're already going into it assuming it's true. And so there's this interesting similarity to me to, like, when you have these sort of fake democracies. So like you have like Russia, for example, or Iran, where it's like, oh, these leaders were elected. It's like, yeah, but that's just the democracy, quote unquote, in that context, sorry, I can't talk today. Context is really just to provide a fake illusion, this illusion of democratic legitimacy to an authoritarian regime. And I don't know, that strikes me as a funny parallel, but what comes into my head, and it's like all that research is just to create the illusion. It's worthless as actual research if you're going in assuming and insisting upon the truth of your prior conviction, right?
Right. And imagine what conservatives could do with microaggression, right? If they had that kind of culture and that kind of ideology where they generated these bogus Orwellian constructs, I mean, they would have just as much of a right to call someone defending abortion a microaggression. They would have just as much of a right to call, like, someone, advocating for open borders a microaggression, because ultimately what leftists are calling microaggressions are deviations from leftist ideology, and sometimes even explicit disagreements with leftist ideology is defined as a microaggression. So, conservatives and libertarians could play that game if they wanted to. They don't, because they're not a cult and they really don't have much of a formal ideology like this, and certainly not as generative as this. But it's just like Joe's paper on like rationalization of inequality. He called it rationalization of inequality to agree with a one-item scale that said hard work tends to pay off in the long run. That's the item. So it's actually true. It has to be true in any universe governed by any universe like ours, right? Any universe where time goes in one direction, and it's not like Groundhog Day. And when you work hard one day, it actually translates to the next day.
Well,
right?
on average, right? Like there'll always be examples of people working hard and getting nowhere, but like generally speaking, yes, it's true.
Yeah, generally speaking, and I think it even says like tends to, right? The item is hard work tends to pay off.
Variation.
And that was his rationalization of inequality variable. That's Napier and Jost. And, conservatives could have published the same data and the same analyses and just called that, because this was a mediator and why conservatives are happier, right? It bothers leftists a lot that conservatives are happier. So they have to explain it away with something that's unfavorable. Oh, they're happier because they rationalize inequality. Okay. Well, a conservative could write essentially the same paper and say that leftists are less happy than conservatives because they fret too much about economic inequality, or they're too obsessed with income variance, variance in incomes. So, because that's what he meant by inequality, is just money, income, wealth. So there's nothing inherently more valid about calling that rationalization of inequality than calling it, perseverating on, income variance or something.
So Joe, basically you'd mentioned that one measure, that one item scale, that there's a truth to it. There's even, he qualifies that it's not an absolutist claim, that but I mean, you can even think about it as loading onto the dopaminergic system. Like we do really well when we put ourselves to the task of long-term rewards and goals, and so we can have this discussion and agree, but it's how you operationalize it, right? So you can have, so how he's basically saying it, what he's saying is that sure, there's this truth here that we're going to measure, and but this is what it's saying, rather than like he's qualifying it with something completely different than what it just at base is expressing,
Right.
which is, yeah, this is a truth that you see anthropologically, biologically, okay, but he's slapping on a meaning. Is that about right?
Except that I'm not sure he would acknowledge that it's a truth.
Mm.
Jost is a communist.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't
yeah. I've
think-
read many of his papers. Yep, I know
Right.
exactly
So
what you
system
mean.
justification is Marxist false consciousness.
Yep.
But you reminded me of an important point. This is social psychology, right? If anyone knows how to measure rationalization, it would be social psychologists. Our field has a considerable history in measuring cognitive dissonance, rationalization, right? He didn't even attempt to measure an actual psychological process of rationalization. He did not capture anything. In fact, it wasn't even his data. He just grabbed data from some national survey and he just, labeled it the way he wanted, right? So he didn't actually run this data collection. But, if you wanted to you could probably get conservatives to rationalize inequality, since they're not like super philosophically, they don't have a clean philosophical kind of argument against this obsession with equality. They just care about it less than leftists do. Libertarians might be better at thinking about it systematically, but conservatives are just, they're just not as extreme as leftists. But, conservatives could do the same thing about, turning their view about abortion and calling it rationalization of abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And that begs the question, wait, who said it's wrong, right?
Right.
The academics would scream like, wait a minute, what do you mean rationalization of abortion? You're assuming that it's wrong? That would be incredibly awkward and invalid, and they would get it. But they do the same thing when they say rationalization of, parentheses, income inequality. Like, wait, who says it's wrong? I don't agree that it's unjust that there's variance in incomes. I don't agree with that at all. So it's a hell of a thing to just assert, that this must be rationalization. What do you mean? Like, do they have a problem with it? If they don't have a problem with it, they can't be rationalizing it. By definition, it's not rationalization unless they have a problem with it, right? And he never even attempted to get at any of that. He didn't measure anything. He just took the answers to that item and just called it rationalization.
And he called it, right.
Yeah, he asserted a process, psychological process that he had no idea had occurred.
And that, so just backtracking for the audience. So what we're discussing right now, there's so much, it's semantic, there's linguistics, there's philosophy of science, there's so much that goes into how to architect a good research question. Well, first of all, how to think about things, observation, how to observe things, how to take them in, how to rationalize them, how to logically formulate them, informally, formally. Epistemology is vital before you even consider measuring, like backtracking a bit, something like microaggression. So just to rewind, like I said, so now you have this thing that you're assuming exists in the observable world, microaggression, and you've already laid that out with the left attaches to that. Now that's just the assumption. Now you're getting into the rest of the scientific method, which basically is like, for these people, a cakewalk, because it's like, oh, we just have our answer already. Now we just have to put some statistical analysis to it. It would kind of frame it and just get what we want. Is that essentially it? Could you walk us down from assumption to hypothesis to like how, you already touched on some measurement, but there's also something about the scale, the Likert scale that you mentioned last time we talked about that, which is the midpoint and how people score.
Right.
So taken together from the assumption down to that point before the conclusion, could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, the issue with that midpoint and correlation is a different issue that we can talk about too. But the thing with Jost and the rationalization of inequality is taking existing data like the national political, I forget what it's called, it's some big national political survey, And what Joe did there, and what he's kind of infamous for, is using mediation invalidly. So mediation is, as you know, connecting a cause and an effect by something in between. So the idea is that in this case, you've got conservatism and you've got happiness, right? Conservatism is the predictor, happiness is the outcome variable. And you want to say that conservatism predicts something else, which then predicts happiness, that there's something that explains the connection between the two, something that's in between them. That's the mediator. And so he inserted rationalization of inequality in between conservatism and happiness. So that conservatism predicts rationalization of inequality, which in this case means agreeing that in the long run, hard work tends to pay off, right? And again, like to your point about the midpoint, we don't even know where conservatives landed there, but they probably agreed, right? They just had to agree more than leftists did for this to work, right? And then have that item then predict happiness, right? And you can get mediation. But that's like mediating conservatism on itself, right? So he does this a lot, where he takes conservatism, predicts some specific belief that is a hallmark of conservatives, right? It's like taking conservatism predicts being against abortion, which predicts happiness, right? You could probably get that to work. So he arbitrarily, invalidly tends to mediate conservatism on some constituent conservative belief, when, mediation is ideally supposed to be like chronological. It's supposed to be time separated. It's supposed to be more event kind of model. But Jost will just grab national election data and start messing with it. And, and then relabel, come up with these Orwellian labels like rationalization of inequality. You didn't even ask them about inequality. You asked them about whether hard work pays off. I mean, you didn't even ask them anything. You just grabbed this data set, but no one's asking them what they think about inequality, right? And you wouldn't be able to call it rationalization, because that bakes in the assumption that there's something wrong with it. And who says that, right? So that's a philosophical position, and that's what a lot of academic leftists don't understand. Like, they will struggle with this point that, look, that's what we call a normative philosophical position,
right,
or an ideological position. It's not a fact that income inequality or income variance is bad, right? Like that's just an opinion, man. So that's what that was. He was misusing mediation. The issue with the midpoint stuff is different, and I don't know what you want to talk about next. Maybe the paper I sent.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just for listeners, to clarify the midpoint thing, and correct me if I'm getting something wrong, but you have a scale from 1 to 7. Let's say it's measuring whatever. I don't know what it would be measuring. It's just a mood or whatever, and people score on average, say 2.8. One group of people, you have two groups, men and women. Okay, men score 2.8, women score I don't know, 2.1. There's something, there's a differential there, but it's still below the midpoint. And so that's what I kind of wanted to go into. Like, people won't, you'll read these papers and you'll see there's a statistical difference. Okay, fine, but it's below the midpoint still. So if that's what I want people to kind of learn about a little bit, if you're okay, and then we can go on.
I just published a report with a perfect example of this on Tuesday. Had you seen that on Substack? So this was about Daily Beast.
Okay.
So
we'll include it in the show notes.
Okay. So Daily Beast fabricated findings trying to link homophobia with mental illness. Right? So there were a couple of things here. Daily Beast fabricated in that most of the variables that they rattled off do not exist in the study. This is kind of an extreme open and shut kind of case, right? So I go into that in the report, and so they made up variables like uber religiosity, No form of religiosity existed in the study. Masculinity, no form of masculinity existed in the study. They just made it all up. So, but the study is also false. And it's false for the reasons that you just touched on. So this is Giannini et al. It's one of your people, an Italian. They
Gramscian.
It's a study of 551 Italian college students, right? They translated the homophobia scale you'll see in the report, I don't remember the name, but a homophobia scale from 1999. They translated it to Italian. 1 to 5 point scale, right? And they did not find any homophobia. So the whole Daily Beast and other reporting, Live Science and others, was just bogus fundamentally because the study itself was false, but Daily Beast ended up just adding a bunch of fabricated effects. But so what they did is 5 point scale, 25 items. They computed some scores, which is weird. I don't recommend it. It's a bad idea. So that means the range is 25 to 125. So if you answer 1 to everything after reverse scoring and everything, the minimum possible score is 25. The max is 125.
Mm-hmm.
The men averaged 35. Right? Now, there's a 5 point scale where it's strongly agree. For some reason, 1 is agree, but it doesn't matter. They reverse some of them. Strongly agree. 2 is agree. 3 is neither agree nor disagree. 4 is disagree. 5 is strongly disagree, right? And it's going to be flipped depending on the direction of the item, right? So that's the scale. When you're below the midpoint, like you were getting at earlier, when you're on, well, I wish they wouldn't have set it up that way, but let's just say when you're below the midpoint, you disagree. That's disagreement. That's not agreement. That's not homophobia. So you could end up scoring a 50, which is higher than what the men averaged, just by being the kind of person who avoids the extremes on surveys. Right. The kind of person who rarely or never chooses strongly agree, disagree, who always chooses normal agreement, disagreement, kind of chill dispositionally, right? There are people like that. That's a psychometric finding, right? You know, you're not obligated to strongly agree or disagree with anything. But if you didn't choose strongly agree or disagree on the right items, you were jacking up your homophobia score, given that they're going to use correlation on this, linear correlation, and they're going to leverage variance between, in this case, the bottom and the near bottom, right? Now, the female average was actually impossible because it was below 25. So that's an error, and don't know what happened with that error. But example items, I mean, some of the items are more like close to what people might think of as homophobia, like being grossed out or something by gays.
Right.
But an example item is that homosexuality is immoral. Another example item is I enjoy the company of gay people. So I never really thought about whether I enjoy the company of gay people.
Say,
I'd probably put neither agree nor disagree or just agree.
I mean, I would do that.
Yeah,
right.
So,
it depends on the gay person.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
So it's like
that's what you're getting. Yeah,
but if you put neither agree nor disagree, you're adding 2 homophobia points because you're giving yourself a 3 instead of a 1, which you would get if you after reversing if you strongly agree, right?
I really quickly just want to slow down here, and I want to do 2 things. I want to try and translate this into layman's terms and also simultaneously check my understanding of what exactly the issue is that you're describing. Excellent. You, Anthony, and Joe are describing here. So in this study, basically, even though everyone was scoring below the middle point in terms of homophobia, meaning if you're at 50, let's just simplify and say homophobia, 1 being not homophobic at all, 100 being super homophobic, like you hate gay people and think it's totally immoral, blah, 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 blah. Everyone's getting below, like well below 50, men and women, you know, even very masculine men.
That's right.
So no one's really homophobic. It's either you're super, super into gay people and love LGBT culture, let's say, or you're just like, yeah, that's fine, I don't care. It's like people can be gay. It's just like in that range, right? So no
Right.
one's a problem, right?
Right.
And so the issue is because you can say that more feminine people, because I think the link they were trying to make you say was like hypermasculinity is linked to homophobia, right?
Yeah, Daily Beast was doing that.
Right. So if someone that you could categorize, and even this would be kind of wishy-washy and difficult to do, but let's say someone you could categorize as being hyper-masculine, much like myself, who is like manly or traditionally masculine, right? Just they're because they're less accepting of homosexual people or LGBTQ people, however you want to put it, than let's say more feminine people. Because there's a difference there, you can say something like being hyper-masculine is linked to being less accepting of gay people. But really, that's not what's going on, because everyone's accepting of gay people. Being hyper-masculine just means that you're not like super, super into it, but you're still fine with it. And so you can create these very misleading titles that make it seem as if hyper-masculine equals homophobic. And that's that's just extremely misleading. Is that basically what's going on?
Yes, that's what's going on. But to be clear, the researchers never actually measured any kind of masculinity, right? So what they were linking it to was different like neuroticism, psychopathology, depression, anxiety. They threw a whole bunch of variables, right, which also helps. But they were doing what you described because the math of correlation lets you leverage that difference where you've got like a 25 to 125 scale, and maybe you've got variance from 25 to 45, right? And that difference, and then you've got variance on the stuff like neuroticism, anxiety, depression. A couple of the things were actually positively correlated with homophobia. Daily Beast didn't report those. But you've got that variance, that movement. So the key is just creating a multi-point scale. The key is just creating a multi-point scale that has agreement and disagreement, and you have multiple points for each of those, like strongly and regular and all that. And then really important, I think, is having that midpoint that says like neither agree nor disagree, which you get to convert into a significant quantity of whatever you're saying this is. In this case, homophobia. In other cases, it would be social dominance orientation or right-wing authoritarianism.
That's another one.
So the math, when you're in the stat software, you're running this analysis. If you have that little variance that's all on the bottom, you can leverage that to correlate it with, almost anything you want. And even though you don't have the thing you're calling it. So it's a mixture of create variance by using a multi-point scale and then label it. So what are you labeling it? You're labeling it homophobia. You're labeling it right-wing authoritarianism, social dominance orientation, right? You get to label something, and then you get to hide the fact that, one, you're not measuring that thing. Second, you didn't find that thing because everyone's clustered on the bottom of these really weird items. So that's the key, is that's so much of social psychology.
I don't know what to say, but yeah. So thank you, and Clay, thank you for synthesizing it beautifully for listeners. Because this, I have to say, and then I will shush, and Clay, you can take it to the next level. But or the next segment we want to go into. But I just want to say, I can breathe, because this is one of the more difficult things to explain to people. And so I hope that this part of the podcast was helpful. So anyway, thank you.
I think, again, for laymen like me who aren't into the research methodology of psychology like you and Joe are, Anthony, excuse me, it's really just comes down to when you make assumptions and when you insist upon outcomes before you even start the research, huge problem. And when you can play with how you design a study, design a paper, so that you can be extremely, well, it can be technically true in a sense if you label certain things certain ways, but those labels are highly misleading. and to effectively be just a lie. Like, I think the example of that Joe was just giving is like, if you're saying, like the Daily Beast is trying to say that hypermasculization or increased masculinity is linked with increased homophobia, and they're using the methodology or the study or misinterpreting the study that we were referencing, that's just a lie. Like, that's just wrong, right?
And that
The
happens
real
all the
thing you
time,
could say
all the
is
time.
being more masculine is correlated with being slightly less super into, let's say, gay culture, but still perfectly accepting of gay people. That would be the more, but that's not flashy. It
And what
doesn't
a
create
surprise.
headlines, right?
It's like, what
Doesn't make
surprise
for
is
But
good.
that? Even,
look what they did, though. Look what they've made us do.
yeah.
What they've made us do is like 8 different times you've been talking about masculinity and homophobia, right? Like, you keep talking about it. And I'm not even sure that you yourself are internalizing that there wasn't even a fake finding of masculinity and homophobia. Like, even using that bottom variance thing we've talked about, masculinity was never measured in this study, right?
Of course.
So, like, the Daily Beast literally fabricated that and 4 other variables. So, but now it's off in the ether, and now we're talking about it, and we're having to correct it. And I emailed them twice, and they never responded. And in 10 years, they haven't run. It's still up, right? Because this was out in 2015, and it's still up, and it's still. And I even contacted the author, no response.
So this is a good thing, actually, to highlight on is, yes, the study didn't make that link. It was the Daily Beast article.
Right.
But speaking of studies that just get things wrong and completely just commit fraud, really, just a fraudulent study, is the thing I referenced mistakenly, assuming that that's what you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, and that's this NSA fake moon landing thing. So you Joe, we've already had you for an hour, and I don't want to be too greedy with your time here, but I really want to get into this because it really blew my mind. You sent this to us. You sent this to Anthony, I think, earlier today, and he sent it over to me, and I could not believe. Like, I think I texted Anthony and said, just the audacity of some people. Like, let's get into this. It's the NASA. The NASA faked the moon landing. This is the name of it. It's kind of a mouthful. NASA faked the moon landing. Therefore, climate science is a hoax and an anatomy of the motivated rejection of science. So, if you could, Joe, explain to us why you sent this to us, basically. Like, what does it attempt to do? What does it claim to do? And then how does it get that wrong?
Right. This was a really novel form of fraud. So this was Lewandowski, Oberauer, and Gignac back in 2013. What they're attempting to do is link human-caused climate change skepticism, or climate skepticism for short, with belief in all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories. So, as you could see in the title, NASA faked the moon landings, or therefore climate science is a hoax, right? So they're even putting the causation in the title, the sequence that, that if you believe NASA faked the moon landings, therefore you believe, climate science is a hoax. Well, that title effect, that titular effect, is completely false by reference to their own data. But what's really interesting about the fraud is that this is what made me think it was a hoax at first. The table where they present the factor loadings for all the items in their conspiracy variable, including the moon landing thing, that table has identical factor loadings across 10 items. So you see 0.742, 0.742, 0.742, on and on and on for 10 items, right? And for people who aren't familiar, I should just explain that. So what's happening here with factor loadings is, say you create a scale, and in this case, you want to create a scale that gets at conspiracist ideation, which is what he called it. Belief in, like, a disposition to believe in conspiracy theories. That's the idea, right? That's a theory that it would kind of all go together, that you believe in this theory and that theory, this thing about Princess Diana, this thing about Coca-Cola, this thing about the moon landings, yada, yada, JFK, all this, right? So you create a scale with these items, and like any other scale, you have to validate it. You have to run various operations and tests on it. But to see if it actually hangs together as one thing, as a belief in conspiracy theories, to see if the different items kind of correlate and intercorrelate together, like responses to the items, you have to run a factor analysis. You have to see if there are, maybe several factors that might group the different conspiracies, for example. Maybe there's something going on that cluster them, right? So they did a factor analysis, and it's complicated math to get at how much of these items, how much do they move together, right? So the factor loadings, the loading for each factor is unique. You might have a really weird case where you have two identical loadings. I'm not sure I've ever seen that when you go to 3 digits like they did, but it's not possible to have 10 identical loadings. It'd be like having a correlation, like imagine a correlation table where you're correlating a bunch of variables like health and wealth and education and all this stuff, and they're all like correlated together, right? If you had the same correlation in all your entries in this table of correlations to 3 digits, right? That's not possible. It's not mathematically possible.
It's just so statistically or mathematically unlikely. It's like winning the lottery, then getting struck by lightning, then finding a 4-leaf clover, then, so on and so forth. It's just so comically unlikely for that to happen.
It's completely, like, identical means they're false because they cannot be identical. And what's really, this was so shocking. It's something that no one has ever done as far as I can tell. And I looked, I tried to find any example of anyone ever doing this, like as a test or something. I found nothing. But what's really tricky about this is that they put a footnote, which is like a Jedi mind trick. They put a footnote at the bottom of the table saying they were doing it, saying that, the same loading is entered for all factors that are on the same composite variable. That's essentially a meaningless string of words because that's not an option. You cannot enter the same loadings. That would be like, again, a correlation table where you say at the bottom, the same correlation coefficient is entered for all pairwise correlations. Wait, what? No, this is science. You have to give the actual loadings, right? You have to give the actual data. You can't, that would make it fake, and it can't be fake. So I ran the factor analysis. I got the data and I ran the factor analysis. I replicated his variance explained, the variance explained that he reports in the paper. So I knew that it was like, I knew I was on the right factor analysis. And I got the true loadings. Of course, none of them are identical, and all but one are smaller than the 0.742 that he reported. And 2 of them don't load, right? So what happens is if the factor loading isn't high enough, you got to get at least, depending on who you are, 0.4 something or 0.5 is going to be your threshold for saying that, these items go together, that this goes into this factor, right? You want to see at least a 0.4, 0.5 or above. Well, there were a couple that did not meet that standard. One of them was the moon landing item, which is the titular effect, the titular item, right?
I see that,
and virtually no one endorsed the moon landing item. So 1,145 online participants, 10 people endorsed the moon landing hoax. 10 people, which is basically 0 in that context. And only 3 of them also endorsed that climate science was a hoax, meaning the majority did not think climate science was a hoax. There was no link, but of course we can't even talk about, it's offensive to even have to talk about 10, numbers like 10 and numbers like 3. That's basically 0. We can't run an analysis on that. That's nothing, right? So he had nothing. And that item did not load on the factor. His latent variable of conspiracist ideation does not exist. It did not as presented. It didn't exist. These items loading on this factor, that was not true. The 0.742, that was false. That was higher than what most of them were. The title is false because that effect did not show up. There was no association between believing the moon landings were a hoax and believing climate science was a hoax. And his table is full of fabricated, false, fraudulent factor loadings that are identical. So this is a complete scratch. I mean, this is fraud, and it's a really funny form of fraud. I mean, that Jedi mind trick at the bottom might give him an out as far as, well, I said I was doing it. Like, oh, I mean, that's really fascinating. That's what made me think it was a hoax at first.
Mm-hmm.
But a hoax, you come clean after it's published. You know, like Sokol and recent critical theory package,
Right.
with like Bogosian and those guys. So,
Yeah.
you know, the hoax, you come clean afterward. It's been, you know, over 10 years. There was a while where I was trying to make all the evidence fit that this was a hoax. Like I was trying to like look at his public statements and trying to make it all fit. I couldn't make it work. And of course, you know, it's definitely not a hoax. He's, you know, like he's sincerely campaigning politically, like, you know, using this kind of, these findings, right? This narrative. And so, this was amazing. It was just like, and it gets at a systemic problem with academia and social psychology and the journals, in that they don't just, we'll see what they do, because I contacted the editor this week,
Yeah, I was gonna say
the new editor,
yeah.
but it's, nothing ever gets retracted unless someone else tells them to, like a university. This is a classic case. When I was dealing with this back in like 2013, 2014, as a grad student, for which they came after me, it was always like, I contact the journal, and they told me to contact his university. And then you go to the journal, you go to the university, they tell you to contact the journal, right? And no one was holding him to account. No one really cared that the findings were false. I don't think social psychologists have a real, like, grasp of falsity. Like, I don't think they
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
if something is false, you have to get rid of it. Like, you have to retract it. You have to clean up the literature, remove it, retract it. This is more than just false, it's fraudulent. But, and it's more than just fraudulent, it's harmful, because he was defaming and derogating very large populations of people. Basically, the goal was, you know, it's kind of straw manning to call it a hoax, but it's just more like people who are skeptical of climate alarmism, and
Right.
who are so-called lukewarmers, who think that, yeah, of course, you know, the Earth has warmed 1 point some odd degrees C, you know, since post-industrial, and it's probably mostly due to CO2 emissions. But, you know, give me a reason to care, and then we'll talk, or something, right?
Right.
So it's, a lot of the constituent beliefs leftists have about climate are false, and he's just basically trying to tag skeptics, as people who believe in the moon landing hoax, people who believe in all sorts of conspiracy theories. So it's really vicious, because for one thing, it's false. Like, he didn't find anything. Something's wrong with his data, by the way, because there should have been far more than 10 people endorsing the moon landing hoax. We don't actually know who his participants were, because he didn't identify the nationality of his participants, which is, what the heck is this? But in America, you can usually get 6 to 8% of people in real surveys by professionals like Pew or Gallup. 6 to 8%, maybe 9, will endorse the moon landings as a hoax. Abroad, it's much higher. It's much higher. Like, people are much more willing to believe that America didn't actually land on the moon, for understandable, like, reasons of, you know, being jelly.
That's the technical term, yes.
Yeah. That's the formal term.
Yes.
But he was in Australia at the time, and he had a lot of, like, attention in Australian blogosphere and New Zealand as well. And his online study, I assume, was mostly Australians and New Zealanders. There should have been at least an American level of belief in that conspiracy, but instead he got 0.8%. That's what 10 out of 1145 is. So that's far less than anyone has ever reported for that belief. Something is wrong there. And I said years later, I found out that his data was doctored, and I have an article about that on Medium. But yeah, something's wrong with that data. You should never get less than 1% of people saying that the moon landings were a hoax. The belief is quite a bit higher than that. but he had nothing.
It's bizarre to me because even in a context where, let's say, it's 6% of Americans you can get to admit on a poll that they think the moon landing is fake. That's 6% of over 350 million people. I can't remember the exact population of the United States, but I'm sorry, 350 million. Like, that's still a pretty large pool of people to pick from by the raw number. Like, you should be able to find enough participants, even of that relatively small percentage. And yeah, I'm struck by how this is just such an it's so obviously just a BS study designed to call people who are skeptical of human-made climate change crazy. Like, oh, it's so transparently, those people who don't believe in climate change are the same as people who don't think the moon landing is real or believe in, chemtrails or whatever the other conspiracy theories are that are obviously silly. And it's trying to bring that level of skepticism of climate change to the level of silliness and absurdity of these other conspiracy theories. Obviously we landed on the moon. Okay. I'm a patriot. I'm a veteran. Like, America did it, man. Like, they can be jelly. I don't care. Just want to throw that out.
You were there.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it's this is what plagues me. It just, every day I think about all this shitty information, not even shitty, but almost bordering nefarious. Almost, it's very, Clay, I lament to Clay about this all the time. It's almost hard not to think that some of these people have bad intentions, because it's just, there is so much fucking literature out there, so much that's published that is so twisted and asymmetrical and just unchecked, that people are eating, and it's really hard not to think that some of these people just are not in it for
I'm gonna push back
a jab.
I'm gonna push back a little bit on that, Anthony. There's a story that I wish I could credit the guy who I was listening to, but there's some guy on the Modern Wisdom podcast that was talking about this is where I got it from. He was talking about this interview that Christoph Waltz did. And I can't remember where the interview was or who the interviewer was, but basically this interview asked Christoph Waltz, who, if you guys don't remember, famously played the lead Nazi in Inglourious Bastards, right? And this interviewer asked Christoph Waltz, like, how did you play evil so well? And Christoph Waltz's answer amounted to, I won't be able to quote it verbatim, but amounted to, people don't think that they're evil. Even the most evil people don't think that they're evil, like 99.999% of the time, right? So I would apply a same logic to this, is like, why does this guy, or why does anyone, do this fraudulent this exercise in which they pre-assume the findings of a paper, or pre-assume the truth when they go into their research, and it spoils their research. It taints it. It's not because they're evil. It's not because they're malevolent and they're trying to ruin the field of social psychology. They really believe in microaggressions. They really believe that they're causing real harm. They really believe in these. At least that's how I interpret it.
Well, you don't have to be evil. Sorry, go on.
Right. Well, just that it's easy for us to label these people as, as bad actors intentionally. And I think they think what they're doing is noble. It's ends justifies the means kind of thinking, right?
Well, yeah, I understand your point, and I think it's just a bit of a jump to. I didn't say evil. I get your point. I think that when you consider personality psychology, like when you consider the dark triad and sadism added to it just recently, I think you're right. I mean, a psychopath or someone who has low capacity for emotional resonance, the capacity to feel empathy, they're not going to cognitively really, they're not going to really be thinking about that and in a conniving way per se, but it doesn't mean that let's take the most extreme example, I wouldn't even say that's the most extreme, but let's take psychopath out of it. You have these antagonistic types who, you don't have to be evil per se for your act to be nefarious. Like, if you're driven by vengeance and a gotcha all the time and you have the power to do it and you want to turn the tables on, because like that doesn't necessitate evil. It's a dark intention, and it doesn't mean the person doesn't have certain attributes of kindness, or what actually Scott Barry Kaufman came up with a measure for the light triad, Kantianism. There are two others I can't, but they're the opposites of the dark triad. And it's much more complicated than just a one-to-one that, this person's evil, that person's not. But the intentions are, and Joe, I would love to know your perspective. Maybe it's not the case that they're waking up every morning thinking I'm going to destroy these people, but their motivation to me is questionable. And maybe it's not all of them, but it's just become such a crystallized picture to me that so much of the research, and when you start to look into the neuroscience, now the political neuroscience, which is an emerging field, they're always looking at brain scans to find differentials between left and right and finding the activation in the insula equals disgust, and it shows more in the conservatives. And it's like, you can't help but think that, and I know this is me casting a judgment based on my own biases, but when you look at the data, how they operationalize, how they measure, you can't help but think that they just really don't like conservatives and they just want to find a way to say fuck you to them. And that's just, Joe, I don't know, take the floor.
So
I don't know.
Anthony and I are bickering, Joe, as we often do.
I want to know what
just
you think.
To kind of just synthesize this into a simple question. Is what do you make of all of this fraud and this bad methodology, and how do you interpret the intentions of the people who are putting together these very flawed studies, who are making these assumptions before they actually go into study and pre-assume the truth before they go into actually study the thing that they believe, right? Like, do you think that there is some malicious intent there? Is it just ideological capture on the part of the people doing this research? Like, how do you interpret all?
I mean, I don't know about evil, but the bringing it back to something scientifically rigorous, I think they're scumbags. So
again, the technical term, right?
Yeah, just like
Is there a
jelly.
scale for that?
Professional term, yeah.
Scumbag scale.
I do look. I've said this before. I know people who've gone to prison, right? People from around the way, so to speak, from Oracle, Arizona, where I grew up. Those people are better people than academics are in general. I think a typical inmate population is going to be morally better by some systematic, wise data collection scoring method than the faculty of a university. I think academia is really dense with extraordinarily bad people and a lot of mental health issues.
Yes.
And certainly I think Lewandowski is, definitely has bad intentions, definitely operating with malice toward conservatives. And this stuff matters because I think the harm is real. I wanted to get data from OkCupid at one point. I tried to get data from OkCupid because I was thinking that, with all this stuff coming out, because the Lewandowski fraud was covered credulously by, Scientific American and a bunch of other outlets, right? And I couldn't get anyone to retract. I think that it probably affects people's perceptions of conservatives such that if you know that someone's a conservative, if that's all you know, like maybe you see it on a dating profile, a lot of leftists seem to believe that means that they believe in crazy conspiracy theories, that they are so-called climate deniers, and leftists won't be able to back up their beliefs on that kind of stuff. But they believe all these terrible things, not to mention that they're Nazis, that they're racist, that they hate immigrants, just immigrants, period. And maybe they hate trans people and so on. So there are some consequential beliefs out there, and I think it actually harms conservatives in real life.
Yes.
It would be interesting to get data for that. I couldn't get anything from OkCupid, but I think if you
mean in
could,
terms
you
of
could probably find
the dating market, meaning they
you could find prejudice against. You could find that conservatism was like predicting fewer responses and controlling for lots of things.
Joe, I'll give you an anecdote, not from OkCupid, but from Hinge. When I lived in New York, a famously fairly liberal place, especially among the cohort that I was, attempting to date, which was like women in their 20s, roughly speaking. I used to have moderate in my bio, in my little on my little profile on Hinge. I'm married now. I actually met my wife on Hinge. Funny story. But I used to have moderate. And when it says like political beliefs, you could do like Democrat, Republican. I think it was like conservative or liberal or moderate. And so I put moderate. And eventually, upon conferring with some of my friends, had to just completely take that away and not show it on my profile, because in New York, moderate is viewed as disguising the fact that you're secretly conservative.
Might as well get
So
a
it's
white
not
hood,
even
Clay.
like women won't go on liberal women in New York won't go for a conservative. If they see moderate, they're like, he's subtly hinting at the fact that he's conservative, and that will mean you'll get less matches on Hinge, which is just, I mean, it's that bad in some places, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So also go to Hinge for that data. I actually think that is a better place.
Oh, yeah.
Political discrimination is much worse now than racial when it comes to the dating world. It's awful, and I don't want to believe that we can take the word evil out of the picture. I don't want to believe that people have bad intentions. I think it's by association. People, like you're saying, Joe, they just adopt these ideas, these heuristics, these shortcuts, and I'm not attributing any malice per se to those people. I do think psychologically, and I talk about this a lot, that there's a certain volatility to people on the left emotionally, and this actually shows pretty clearly in consistently high emotionality and negative emotionality and various other things. And that's not to say that the right doesn't have its own stuff going on, for sure. It's not, and again, it's not one-to-one, it's not a perfect, just descriptive architecture here where you're saying one side is sick with this and the other side's sick with that. But there is a volatility and a vulnerability, a susceptibility to fall into the trap of following the darker personality trait types at the upper echelons of these activist circles of academia, where all this shit falls downstream. So I just have a very hard time, and Joe, you articulated it well in synthesizing my thoughts. I do think that in the academy especially, there are a lot of these people are not the best people. And saying that is going to be the new thing to be brave about saying, because that's where the information comes from, and the media takes it and screws it all up, and that's what we're left with. And so my question to you, Joe, I don't know if we're going to wrap up now, but I have one more question. Somebody who's in this kind of poking into this field, wanting to pursue research, what do you say? And I get a lot of questions in my Instagram, students in their PhD programs or masters or in undergrad studying psychology around the country. What does a student who's conservative in psychology do? How do we pursue research that we want to pursue, that we love, a question that we have that we really want to pursue? Do we just bypass the academy and start something independent? How do we do that? And what would be some words of wisdom that you can offer people, or myself too?
If you're a conservative or one thing I forgot to mention is that I think it's unfortunate that we always frame this as leftists versus conservatives. Like when we talk about diversity, intellectual, political diversity, it's really about leftists and non-leftists. So many of whom will be conservatives, and we should definitely want lots of conservatives, specifically like real conservatives, in social psychology. But you don't have to be one or the other. You can just not be a leftist. You can be a libertarian. You can be something idiosyncratic, something none of the above. You can be a moderate, centrist, whatever. So it's really about the left versus everyone else. But if you're a young person who wants to do substantive social psychology research, if you can't get the training any other way, you should probably go to grad school. But I would not plan on going into academia. I would even maybe specifically avoid going into academia after. Because academia is not rigorous. They're going to make you lower your standards by osmosis. They're going to run you out if you're in any way public. So like you're not getting a job in academia if you are known to be either a
Contrary.
conservative or counter leftist, critical of the left, right? That's probably the operational piece, right? So I would plan on a career outside of academia, and we need probably pioneers to pioneer that path, that ecosystem of doing substantive psychology research outside of the academy.
Yeah.
And of course, also, I mean, there are a couple of options though. You could end up at some place like University of Austin, right?
Right.
Potentially, I don't know if they really support research, but potentially you could go to New College in Florida or Hillsdale in Michigan. But in general, I wouldn't plan on academia. And some researchers, I forget his name, but a guy in biomedical research carved his own way after doing postdoc after postdoc after postdoc. He ended up founding his own little NGO, his own little nonprofit to do his research outside of academia because it was just so impossible to get established. It's really hard in those sorts of lab sciences,
Yeah, the
bench
basic
sciences.
research.
Like if
Right.
your experiment, if your idea doesn't work, you're just kind of SOL. Whereas in psychology, you can make it work, right? You can just do what we talked about earlier. You can call something homophobia even when you didn't find any of it, right? You can
So you could be
label
a scam artist.
you can label anything. There's complete methodological flexibility, right?
Right.
But in real sciences, there's a real risk of failure if it's a hypothesis that you have to invest years of work into, and lab work, data collection, and all, and it can be kind of expensive too. They require bigger grants than psychologists do. So if that fails, if it doesn't turn out, you're just kind of you're done, right? So it's a lot more stressful, I think. Whereas, yeah.
I'd like to say just briefly before we wrap, that strikes me, Joe, as sort of, I guess, sad for lack of a better term, right? Because I still sort of believe in the power of the academy or the potential for good of academia, of doing really good and interesting things. And, as you rightly point out, like if there's no ideological diversity, that just absolutely undercuts the entire mission and purpose of a research university, right? And so it strikes me that the way to remedy that is to encourage more conservatives and libertarians and moderate, even like just moderate leftists and not, the extreme or far left, to go into the university and diversify the pool of students, grad students, undergrad students, grad students, and eventually researchers and professors and so on. But is it just that it's too far gone for that to be a realistic option, in your opinion?
The issue is, how did you put it at the beginning? It was like to bring in more conservatives and other groups, right? Well, you see, this is why Heterodox Academy failed, and because there's a lot behind that. But it doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter what I recommend. It doesn't matter what Heterodox Academy puts on its website. The only thing that matters is that universities, the people who make the decisions, they need to hire people. If they're not hiring conservatives and other non-leftists, then it doesn't matter. So the decision is not ours. So the decision and the power is totally in the hands of the universities, and they're not doing it. They're not hiring. Even with the settlements with the Trump administration, I'm not sure any of that included any commitment to hire, serious scholars, which would at this point almost by definition be non-leftist. So if they're not going to hire people, then nothing changes. That's why Heterodox Academy didn't matter, because they didn't get anybody hired. They didn't elicit any kind of change anywhere to get any, you really need to hire a lot of people, and you need to do it now. Like 100 people. You should be looking to hire every university should be looking to hire dozens of conservatives. The problem is they don't exist, right? There's a pipeline problem here. They didn't go to get a PhD in social psychology or all these other fields. There's only like 5 guys out there, right? It's like the hamburger place. It's just like there's not that many. So you couldn't hire, but they're not even trying to hire the 5 guys, right? So that's what matters is like when we say we should do this, or it's the universities that have to make that decision, and they're not making that decision, and they're probably not going to make that decision, and they'd have terrible arguments against that decision too. Just call it like DEI for conservatives or whatever. I don't think social psychology, academic social psychology, can be saved. I think
No.
it should be shut down.
Yeah.
There's probably that's why I don't recommend people go into it. It's just such. Look at what I told you about, right?
Yeah.
I'm one Mexican, and I'm telling you about the Lewandowski fraud, Napier and Jost, and Vagina and Jost, and all these other examples, and then that homophobia scam, and I didn't look for any of it, right? I didn't go looking for any of this. I'm afraid to go look because I don't want to find what I would find, right? So this is just stuff I noticed, like basically walking to the store kind of thing, right? This is just, oh, I read a blog post, I saw this, a news article, right? I have so many examples of fraudulent and false claims that are in my head just from carrying on living my life, right? I'm not looking for anything. So if they're willing to publish fraud like the Lewandowski fraud, where you've got 10 identical factor loadings, and that's not being retracted, at least so far, I mean, that's a crazy situation, right? That's a crazy timeline. This is not, it's not getting any media coverage. It's not known to the public that it's this bad. And to the issue of like whether these people have bad motives and so on, they all went after me. They all went after me. So like Lewandowski's University of Bristles, they sent a letter to my department chair at ASU to try to shut me down and maybe prevent me from getting my PhD. They were a little bit too late, but I'm not sure what would have happened if they had sent the letter a year before. The University of Queensland, the 97% climate consensus fraud place, that was by Cook et al. Cook was actually one of Lewandowski's students from like a communications program or something. They're connected, right? So the Queensland also sent a letter to my department chair. And then everyone else would contact John Haidt, and they'd contact Steve Newberg, and they would come after me for finding other fraud or asking for someone's data or pointing out like some wildly false claim they made in the Washington Post. I mean, so they're always like going after people who speak out, or at least, Mexican grad students who they think they can shut down through levers like John Haidt or Steve Newberg, who is respected faculty at ASU.
So just the rot's too deep. I mean, the foundations of the house are too compromised. You have to tear it down and just rebuild it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, and we already know most findings don't replicate. And that's actually an overestimate of how many are true, because some of it's invalid anyway. But there's a lot of intersecting evidence. Like it's not clear that social psychologists can give a good answer to the public asking them, so what can you do for us? Right? So what can you do for us? What have you got for us? What can you tell us that's true and useful, right? And I'm not sure that they have a good answer for that, because it's not going to be stereotype threat, right? It's not going to be, so much of the classic stuff just fell apart. And so it's certainly not going to be the Lewandowski stuff or anything out of NYU, right? So it's...
Oh, certainly not. Certainly not.
Right.
I mean, I think I said that the last time was the last thing I'd say, but just on my ending note, for sure, as a personal note to people listening, those of you who have reached out to me, who are in programs, psych programs, or who want to pursue, for some of the people that I'm referencing, I'm in your position. I just graduated with a BA in psychology, and I'm sort of like in limbo land a little bit with this. But I will say I do want to pursue it still, but I think maybe a master's program is possible, but I think going the entrepreneurial route and being inventive and industrious and really collaborating with friends who are smarter than you or as smart, being entrepreneurial about it. And that's where I'm at right now. So if any of you are listening to this and feel kind of at odds with yourself, just know that I feel that way about my life sometimes when it comes to this, because I love psychology, I love research. But Joe, you have been, I don't know if you know this, but you are sort of a mentor from afar, and your brain is just incredible. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today. And I'm so glad that we have a connection, and glad that I'm not shouting into a void, and to know that there's a serious person in this profession who is seeing so much of what I have seen over the years and have felt alone about, frankly. And I feel good about what I can do with questions that I have, but I don't feel good about the field. So it's good to know someone who feels that kind of ambivalence too. So thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks,
And
Joe.
Clay, do you have anything
just to summarize everything Anthony said with your advice, Anthony, you're saying start a podcast and invite Joe on the podcast. Basically,
exactly.
If you're into psychology, if you're getting your BA, just do that. It's way better than getting a PhD.
Thank you so much, Joe.
You. Yeah. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
This was great.
And I loved having you on, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.